Do you like horses? Do you resent being late so much that you arrive 15 minutes earlier than you should have been and make everything uncomfortable? Is your favorite hobby watching stock exchanges? Well, have I got a god for you to play? Welcome everyone to the Poseidon overview. If you picked up Retold for the first time, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Zeus and all his infantry and myth unit focus would be the easiest to play. That title, however, is strongly contested by Poseidon due to how streamlined he is. Poseidon is laser focused on cavalry. He has land horses, he has water horses, he has air horses, and even man horses for all your cavalry needs. Even his bonuses, mythical technology and god power help you horse around in some way, shape or form. Let's crack on and see what he has to offer. First thing to focus on when you start a game as Poseidon is Lure, an archaic age god power that holds a strong position as one of the most powerful early game economic boosts available in the game. Lure is a powerhouse of Poseidon's game plan, and proper utilization of its threefold effect helps to build a snowballing advantage. First is the immediate savings from not having to build a granary, saving you 50 initial wood and a bunch of seconds in villager building time. While the building time is typically negligible, the wood savings can be pretty diverse in terms of its effects, such as allowing you to build an extra house, training an extra fishing ship on a water map, or getting an early pickaxe if you're particularly zesty. Second comes the poultry. Upon immediate use of the god power, Lure spawns 3 chickens in the archaic age, with the number going up the farther in the game you advance. Still, even at the archaic age, that is roughly 300 extra food that your opponent is going to be aching for, making your transition into the classical age that much smoother. Finally, the luring mechanic. This unassuming piece of rock lures anywhere from 12 to 1900 food from the map depending on the age. The animals come in from all across the map and don't attack Poseidon's players' units even if the lured animal is typically hostile. This is an obvious benefit since food is the most important resource in the archaic age, and between free chickens, lured food, instantly built granary replacement, it's understandable why people love Lure as much as they do. Even beyond the initial early game casting, which itself gives around 1400 food, classical and heroic age recasts of Lure can give you somewhere in the ballpark of 16 to 2000 food respectively, provided enough animals are still left on the map. That's a lot of value for just 20 favor. Second thing that may catch your eye if you're playing a water map in particular is that your first dog will have a free buddy, a Hippikon. This little thing is harmless and serves as water-only scout whose only purpose in life is to witness. Beyond that, Hippikon doesn't do a whole lot else, so its whole game plan is to basically scout the best fishing spot for your next dock or find your opponent's dock. Usually it means that the Hippikon finds out that your initial dock location is woefully misplaced, making you bash your head against the keyboard, but that's a separate topic for another time. Oh, and he also respawns after he's killed. The third and so far least noticeable effect in the early game is that your scout, Kataskopos, moves a tiny bit faster than normal. Kataskopos is already the single best scouting unit in the game, and this bonus is good, but doesn't necessarily tilt the arrow into the better side, as there is not much Kataskopos really requires. I'm planning to make individual videos for minor gods as well, breaking them down, so I'm gonna ask that we forego the details on these two, but in short, in classical age you get a choice between Ares, a god that excels at buffing your infantry, hurting your opponent's infantry, and giving you a classical age siege weapon. And Hermes, a god that buffs your cavalry and gives them a range support in the form of centaurs, which are as fast as cavalry so they don't drag down your army in terms of speed. Yeah, 90% of the time you are gonna pick Hermes, unless you're going up against someone who really loves to spam infantry. Upon reaching classical age, Poseidon himself hits you with an immediate discount. All of your stables and markets are 30% cheaper, costing just 70 and 105 wood respectively. To put some numbers behind this, making just 2 stables in a market suddenly becomes 105 wood cheaper, going up 130 wood if you decide to build 1 more stable. Granted, it's not as much savings as you would get from the lure, but it does help spam more stables, which in turn spam more cavalry, as well as reduce reduce the amount of woodworkers so that you can focus on what really matters in life, which is resources to spend on your cavalry. The second noticeable bonus is that your market prices for trading resources are more even, meaning that Poseidon gets to buy and sell resources for a fairer price than normal. This helps the best if you find yourself floating a bunch of resources and are in need to quickly exchange them in a roughly equal manner. This bonus synergizes especially well with cheaper stables, giving you an easy way to circumvent having to manually collect wood. Third bonus in Poseidon's mythical technology applies directly to your cavalry. All of your mounted units are faster than regular Greek cavalry by a small margin that increases throughout the ages, whilst the technology load of horses make all of your cavalry see better and regenerate HP. The speed boost is hard to quantify in concrete numbers, but 0.2 speed in classical age may sound modest. However, it does help you by making your cavalry easier to control, pick advantageous fights with, and escape hard counters like spearmen and camels. In addition, the speed boost also helps both your trade caravans, boosting your late-game trade economy, and myth units, meaning that they're just that much more likely to flee from heroes. Load of horses, however, is a bit less interesting. It affects 3 units, which helps if you're making a lot of those 3 units, but the line of sight increase only helps in picking out a stray villager trying to escape. The regeneration rate is in itself quite slow at 30 HP per minute, and with many units that could potentially amount to a decent chunk of villager work time being compensated. Doing some rather simplistic math behind the scenes and converted HP restored to the cost of cavalry units you hypothetically don't need to retrain, we find that each Hippias and Prodromos regeneration rate is roughly on par with half a villager's work efficiency on a farm, and any Hetairoi you create slightly exceeds that. Putting that into perspective, having 30 Hippikon, 30 Prodroma or 26 Hetairoi is basically on the same level as having 15 invisible villager farming somewhere, though in reality these units would lose a lot of value due to standing still and not contributing to the fights. The one and only saving grace that Lord of Horses has is that it's pretty cheap at 75 food and 3 favor. Fourth and final point that the Poseidon player might encounter is that whenever your opponent knocks down your buildings, be it a house, a temple, a fortress, or anything in between, the rubble spawns a small contingent of militia. Weak, fragile infantry that is equivalent to spitting in the face of your opponent as they hit you in the face. Militia are very situational, being outclassed by basically anything beyond villages and wild animals, but they can be used to stop an unprotected siege engine that knocked down a market on the other side of the map. Unlike other bonuses, militia do not scale up with larger ages, but they do benefit from regular infantry upgrades in case you want to slap them a little bit harder, as well as having the bigger buildings produce more militia. So for instance, fortresses are definitely going to create significantly more militia than things like houses, towers, or drop-off sites. Once again, upon reaching the heroic age, you have a choice between 2 gods. Dionysus helps you with your cavalry, making them vampiric, and gives you a dinosaur that grows in power after fighting for long enough. He can also temporarily cover your troops, including myth units, in bronze, which is about as broken as it sounds. On the other hand, Aphrodite grants a universal eco-boosting, a golden lion that deals area of effect damage and can actually keep up with your troops in terms of speed. She can also cast a curse and
Flashback.
Ooh. Plammy that came in clutch. Get pigged! Get pigged like a pig.
End of flashback.
Yeah, do that. Poseidon increments your cavalry, smith units, and caravan speeds further, making them that much easier at dodging arrows and hopefully raid to your heart's content. You also get access to more units, naturally, such as the fabled Prodromos, an anti-cavalry cavalry unit, as well as more buildings which spawn more militia. However, since there's no new bonuses taking effect in the Heroic Age, I'll take this opportunity to briefly touch up on some of the unique hero choices you have as Poseidon. Theseus is a standard archaic Greek hero. He spawns quickly, collects relics for free, and has an anti-air ranged attack. He has slightly more pierce armor than the other Greek Archaic Age heroes, but he's generally just a slightly more powerful infantry with a bonus against Mythians. Atalanta is available in Classical Age and has the distinction of trading relatively fragility for being roughly as fast as Poseidon's Hippias, despite running on foot. This means she won't drag the overall speed of your army the way that some other heroes might, and she will also be able to circumvent any Mythians that could try to disrupt your own forces. Alternatively, she could be used to pick up the relics from under the opponent's nose, as most of the other heroes outside of Van Jean and Bellerophon are unable to keep up with her. Hippolyta is the Heroic Age hero, and just like Atalanta, sacrifices a little bit of HP and raw damage output, but this time gaining an extra bit of range, making her excellent to take out units from farther away whilst your cavalry serves as a meat shield. And finally, Mythic Age unlocks Polyphemus, a big mean cyclops that occasionally smashes your opponent's units, sending them flying. Unlike the rest of your troops, Polyphemus is slow, tanky, and incredibly powerful, dealing massive quantities of hack and crush damage, easily knocking down buildings in return for being slow and terrible against anything ranged or fast-moving cavalry. If it helps, think of him as an extra special Cyclops that doesn't suffer tremendous bonus damage from other heroes. Speaking of Mythic Age, your choices today include Artemis, the goddess granting you a devastating earthquake and a fire-breathing chimera, as well as Hephaestus, the god that propels your armory tech research, saving you a bunch of resources in the process, and giving you Colossi, which make a lovely pairing with Polyphemus at how quickly they both tear through buildings. The final thing that is exclusive to Poseidon is the Hetairoi, an expensive cavalry unit that mirrors a lot of its stats from the Hippias cavalry. Side by side, Hetairoi is nothing to write home about. The unit has worse attack, lower speed, armor, and even line of sight. The 5 extra hit points aren't making me particularly happy about the trade-offs, especially since individual Hetairoi cost 20 resources more than Hippikon. The only noteworthy thing capable of offsetting these loss are the fact that they are trained at half the time at the fortresses and have an area of effect. Using a variety of units to test an equal resources army of 12 Hetairoi and 14 Hippikon, we get the following results. Hetairoi are pretty similar in a lot of ways to their non-unique counterparts, mostly being strong against all the same units as Hippikon and losing to the typical counters. The least amount of difference I've observed was with ranged units, where the area of effect damage was thoroughly offset by the higher cost of individual Hetairoi, as well as the lower armor and speed, meaning that Hetairoi either did just as well as the Hippikon, or were actually slightly worse on average. Theoretically, if the Archer player wanted to further minimize their losses, they would spread their units a bit farther, but even bunched up, Hetairoi actually didn't do significantly better, suggesting that you could use either of the 2 cavalry types to clear ranged units. Fighting cavalry as either Hetairoi or Hippikon gave inconsistent results, with fights having a tendency to snowball dramatically and be very dependent on random pathfinding glitches or getting lucky with first hits. Still, Hetairoi do perform roughly 10% better than a Hippikon on average against cavalry. They had more HP left over when fighting regular or purpose-mounted units, and dealt more damage before succumbing to anti-cavalry specialists. I wouldn't go so far as to say Hetairoi counter cavalry by any stretch of the imagination, especially since as a Poseidon player you'd want to respond with your own prodromoi in that sort of situation. But it is nice to know your Hetairoi won't fall to enemy horsemen. The sole exception for that is, of course, the war elephants. High cost, large individual size, and colossal HP pool of these super tanky units meant that, even outnumbering them almost 2-to-1, Hetairoi are just never going to get a chance to shine with their area of effect damage, so they get trampled over pretty brutally, dealing 34% less damage on average than Hippikon. Tanky expensive units are just not a good matchup for these guys. Finally, there's infantry. Utilizing hoplites as a stand-in for regular infantry and Hippospists as a stand-in for anti-infantry specialists, I found out that Hetairoi do about 20% more damage on average than a comparable costing group of Hippikon. Which does make sense. Individually, infantry costs just a fraction of a cavalry unit, which means that both horsemen were fighting at a sizable numbers disadvantage, which is exactly where one would expect Hetairoi's area of effect damage to shine. There's only one unexpected exception, however, in the anti-archer infantry such as the Huskaros, where it seems like the difference was pretty much non-existent. My best guess is that the higher average cost of such infantry kinda saves them in a similar way to elephants, negating Hetairoi area of effect damage enough to even the scales. Based on these results, we can infer that the Hetairos' main advantage is going to be against large quantities of comparatively weak units, such as dedicated infantry counters. Their area of effect damage shines higher in large numbers, meaning that even if an individual Hetairos is unable to beat even a generic Hippeos or Jarl, having a group of as few as 6 will be enough to turn the tide of the battle in their favor. They will also do an unexpected damage against dedicated anti-cavalry counters, and while I wouldn't go so far as to suggest countering Herdmen or Catapeltis with your Hetairoi, you might find that when they go down, they will go down swinging. The trade-off is simple. Hetairoi are terrible against tanky expensive units such as war elephants or myth units. If someone finds a unit that is large enough and physically can absorb all the damage Hetairoi dish out, you might want to leverage your higher speed in order to escape that fight. Speaking of speed, while Poseidon does accelerate your Hetairoi, Hippikon remained the faster, cheaper and better armored option, meaning that it's a better choice for raiding economy, and even a better sieging option if you find yourself in a pickle and need to quickly take down an important building. Perhaps the biggest knock against the unit is Poseidon's playstyle at large. The sea god loves to rush into battle, pumping out early pressure with a lightning-fast pace, forcing your opponent to surrender. The bonuses Poseidon grants either go directly against utilizing Hetairoi, such as making the stables cheaper, but having the fortresses remain as expensive as ever, or at the very best, applying to both Hetairoi and Hippikon at the same level, such as the speed increase. Hetairoi simply come too little too late for most games to make a name for themselves, and therefore suffer from flying under the radar. Regardless, that will be it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it or have found some grain of information to try in your next Poseidon game. I'll try to make sure these come out somewhat regularly, given enough support, so I kindly ask you to leave a comment saying whether or not you would like that sort of thing. Until then, I will see you around.